So what the heck is restoration anyway? Like, what is reconstruction versus rebuild versus put back versus remediation or water mitigation? These are terms that we hear in restoration, but we don't have clinical definitions for it. Well, guess what? This has turned into madness, and today in this video, we're gonna start to unpack some of that. That's right, Uncle Shane is gonna break it all down. And in order for us to figure all this out, we're gonna have to be asking some really simple questions like, why is it that you drive on a parkway, but you park on a driveway? How did a guinea pig get his name? He ain't from Guinea, and he ain't a pig. Well, those are really good questions that a fifth grader might ask. Well, guess what? That same fifth grader needs to be unpacking the restoration industry, because that madness over there about driving on parkways, that has made its way into restoration. And today, we are going to be putting a stop to that. We're gonna unpack some of the madness in restoration. There's a lot of terms that are used that shouldn't be used. They're called misnomers. I actually don't know what a misnomer is by definition, but I know that that's what it is, okay? So here's the deal. Uncle Shane's gonna break it all down. If you own a restoration company and you're ready to get everybody in your company on the same page, and let's try to figure out why do they park on the driveway and drive on a parkway, well, we're going to break it down in this video here today. Let's go. All right, guys, so as we get started, do me a favor, hit the like and the subscribe button, drop a comment, and let me know, where are you tuning in from, okay? So let's talk about just a handful of the terms real quick that I hear just thrown around that we're going to kind of cover today. And the format for this video is we're going to talk about a lot of the terms that are just used, okay? And then we're going to kind of break out restoration into what I would call a restoration sequence. It's similar to a workflow, but just the sequence of events on a restoration project, we're going to break those down. So we're going to have terms that are used, widely used, okay? And then we're going to look at an official restoration sequence, a sequence of events. And then after we do that, then we're going to kind of break down, look at the sequence of events, and then we're going to try to stick these random terms that we hear, like water restoration and stuff that doesn't make sense. We're going to try to stick that back into the actual structure so you will have a better idea about what these terms are. Because at the end of the day, guys, it doesn't really matter what you call it or what I call it. It's just like, when I say tomato, you got to know what a tomato is. And when you say onion, I got to know what an onion is. We got to get on the same page, and we're going to do that today. So here's just a handful of the terms that I've got. Restoration, right? What is restoration? Mitigation. What is mitigation? Water damage restoration. These are terms that we'll unpack here. Remediation. What is remediation? We've heard the term remediation. We've heard mold remediation. I've heard some people say water remediation. And to be honest with you guys, like, some of these terms that y'all will say are they're stupid. They don't make any sense. But then I got to look in the mirror, because to be honest with you, I call it water mitigation, right? Like, that's what that's what we all know to be true. We call it mitigation, water mitigation, but at the end of the day, the term water mitigation doesn't make any sense either, because you're not mitigating water, you're mitigating the damage caused by the water. Does that make sense? So here's the deal. There's a lot of these slang terms, and since everybody knows what it means, we're gonna start to borrow some of that and use some of that. I've got another video that we'll be publishing to where we're gonna be talking a lot more about just other definitions in restoration, like adjusters, field adjusters, desk adjusters. Like, there's just a lot of terms that you need to be aware of. There's a lot of industry jargon that it will be helpful if you know what it is. And the bigger your company gets, the longer you stay in this business, really the more important it is to know the difference between a wasp and a shark. You know, go figure. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about, all right? So let's look at the restoration sequence of events, okay? I was debating on calling this the restoration workflow versus sequence, and I think a sequence is a better way to describe this, okay? And this is basically going to be anytime that there's a restoration project, there will be a series of steps or a sequence that will be involved, and you won't hit every single sequence or every single step on every single project, because a lot of these things will depend what type of project is it. Is it a water job, a fire job, a mold job, a recon job, etc.? So let me just take a minute and let's talk about what are the elements, what are the items that are in a restoration sequence. So one of the first things that I've got here is emergency services, okay? Like, this is a really good thing to start with. A good example of emergency services is demolition and extraction, tarping a roof, or board ups. These are examples of emergency services. Now, you could say water, like water mitigation, water, like extraction and drying, that is an emergency services, but like, I'm trying to break this out because there's also a chance that drying is not in emergency services. Like, it will be, but like, you can break things down where, just follow me here, right? Like, there's things you have to do before you can dry something. So let's just suffice it to say that at the outermost level, or the outermost layer, emergency services, also referred to as EMS, emergency services, might be demolition, stuff that you need to get out of the way before you can dry it. Extraction of bulk water. If you've got 3 foot of water in the house, you can't dry anything till you get the extraction out, right? The things you have to do before that, right? Emergency services, tarping a roof, that's a good example. Board up, that's a good example. Another one that I didn't put on here might be tree removal, right? Those are emergency services. Does that make sense? These are examples of emergency services. There's many cases where you can't truly properly dry the house when you got a roof that's got a big hole in it with a tree on it. It's hard to stabilize the roof, put whatever covering you need to on the roof with a freaking oak tree on it, okay? So I'm just letting you know that at this level here, I've got emergency services. Things like this: demolition, extraction, tarping a roof, board ups. These are things that need to get done right away, immediately, no matter what. Okay, does that make sense? Hopefully that's helpful. Now, the next thing we've got is I've got cleaning. Okay, so cleaning kind of comes into this. You may or may not have to clean, but there are chances and worlds that you might have to clean before you dry. You might need to clean the structure because you've got like smoke or something like around. Okay, you just got to clean the structure. Maybe you've got blood on it. Maybe you've got mold on it. Like something's in the way, and in order to properly dry something, you need to apply your antimicrobial, and if it's covered in mud or covered in soot, you can't properly get your antimicrobial to work because by definition, according to the manufacturer's recommendations on the antimicrobial agent, all of them say they need to be applied to a clean structure. So you've got to clean that before you put it on there. Does that make sense? So in many cases, you're going to be doing a lot of these things all at the moment of responding to a water job, okay? It's just that when we do water, guys, we're gonna respond, we're going to pull up the baseboard, we're gonna extract the water, we're gonna do multiple pieces of these steps all in one visit. And that's the reason why it starts to get a little bit complicated, because once you start doing some really big jobs, or once you've done restoration for many, many years, so 5 years or a decade, or you've done 100 jobs or 200 jobs or 500 jobs or 1,000 jobs like we have, then you start to see edge cases like this start to populate, and you start to see them, and that's when you kind of have to break these down. And you got to keep in mind that the adjusters you talk to, they talk to guys that do every one of these job types. So like one restoration company might think cleaning means one thing, and another restoration company thinks it means something else, and that adjuster talks to both restoration companies. So what's he supposed to think? Okay, so like this is where it comes into. So take it back down. We've got emergency services, and then we've got cleaning. Okay, you're going to respond because you can do some of these things. You can do demolition, tarp up, board ups, tree removal. You can do that before you clean. Does that make sense? So for that reason, if you can pull apart, that's why we're doing it. If it can be separated, that's what we're doing for the argument in this exercise, okay? Now we get back into cleaning. There's structure that you might need to clean, okay? But structure could really be broken up into, cleaning can be broken into two things. You got cleaning structure and cleaning contents, okay? Cleaning structure, like let's say, for instance, you've got to clean the mud or the sewage off of the floor, right, before you dry it. Contents. Maybe you've got to clean some of the contents. Contents, in many cases in these world, this is where the contents will be taken off-site, right? They're not going to be cleaned in the home. Sometimes they might. If it's a fire, there's a chance that you can clean it inside the house, but it really kind of depends case by case. But just know this. There are situations where you will need to clean before you can do any drying, okay? There are situations where you might need to clean, and you might have to do that before you do any drying. And I'll put environmental in cleaning because technically at the end of the day, I would say mold is cleaning. You're cleaning the mold. That's closer to how I would describe mold or asbestos or lead, okay? Those are environmental concerns. Those environmental concerns, you can call it abatement, right? Abatement's another good term that would fit in there, but abatement of what, right? So either way, they're environmental concerns, mold, asbestos, and lead. And here's my point. Here's the bigger thing that you need to know. Those things, okay? Right here we've got mold, asbestos, and contents. These are things that may need to be addressed before you can go completely full bore on your drying, okay? Because maybe you can't set your fans, so you don't want to blow mold everywhere. You don't want to blow asbestos. You don't want to blow the lead anywhere, right? There's other situations where you don't want to blow category 3 materials. You got to get that stuff cleaned up first with your air scrubbers. Those are situations where you might clean before you start drying things, okay? And furthermore, there's also cases before you might even start doing demolition, okay? There's some cases where you may not be able to demolish things until you've got these environmental concerns handled, okay? So for whatever that's worth. So hopefully this is helpful. Your emergency services, number 1, then your cleaning, number 2, right? Now we have what I'll call your structure mitigation, all right? And keep in mind, I'm just trying to break out the pieces of the workflow here in the sequence, and then we'll stick everything where it goes here in just a minute. All right. So now you've got mitigation, drying the actual structure. In this situation, maybe we're done a deal where a tree fell in a house. We've got the tree removed. We've got the emergency board up done, or maybe some tarping. So if it rains again, it's not going to flood the house. Okay. So we've done a little bit of that work. And then let's assume the tree fell on the house. Okay, we had to do temporary measures to secure the roof, and there's asbestos and mold present. Okay, so we have to do some environmental stuff. All that has to happen and occur before you put fans on that project. Does that make sense? All of that happens before you put fans on that project. Hopefully this was helpful. If it is, drop a comment and let me know. And if you like this, like the video, please. I want to make sure that we at least go through all of this. And after we've discussed this, I can start to show you why those terms that we use broadly don't always make sense. And I'll start to define those as we go through, okay? So structure mitigation, that's pretty self-explanatory. Now, we've also got an evaluation or engineering phase, okay? Now, this might be done in situations where you're looking, should we demolish this or should we restore it? And this is going to happen a lot more in cases where maybe a tree is on a house, or maybe there was a fire and the fire, it burned, but we don't know if it destroyed the beam or does the beam just need to be cleaned. Those are situations where you don't know, do we demolish this or can we save it? And a lot of times this is an evaluation process and or engineering, okay? Now, if you're starting to see, some of these steps don't really occur on water jobs. A lot of these are like when a tree hits a house, or whenever maybe you've got an earthquake, stuff like that might happen, okay? Or really more importantly, fire is the best example. And fire is a very hairy beast, okay? Very hairy beast. And I'll just tell you this, like, once I started doing this on the fire jobs, I started to understand I didn't really like those as much, okay? There's just a lot of moving parts. The terminology became very complex for my team. And with residential water damage jobs, they're just so much more simple, so much more cut and dry, if we can borrow that one. I just like it. It's much easier to execute, okay? A water job in a house looks like a water job in a house, right? A fire, man, what does that mean? Was that like grandma burnt the turkey, or is the roof off the house? They're both fires, you know? One of them could just be a puffback for smoke or something, but you don't know because in your CRM, you're labeling it as a fire job. And man, what does that mean? That's also the reason why I like water jobs in residential properties, because when I say, is it for a home or a business? If it's for a home and it's a water job, like what does it look like? You know, like it's not an 80,000 square foot house, but if it's up for a business, there's a lot of commercial facilities that are 80,000 square feet, okay? And this easily could be, this could be a 100,000 square foot facility, all right? 20,000 square feet per floor, and it could have leaked on the third floor. So like, what does that mean? We may have 20,000 affected on one floor, 18,000 affected on another, 3,000 on another. Like the term water job in commercial can be vastly different than what it would be in residential. And this really matters because if you own the business, all right, and you're no longer involved in day-to-day, you just see that you guys got a water job, okay, great, that's not a big deal. Maybe it's Friday morning, you're heading out of town for a 3-day trip to the Smoky Mountains, right? And that's fine, not a big deal. If you're gonna go do a water job and it's for a house, no problem. But if that was for a 100,000 square foot complex, because it was a water job and a commercial property, let me tell you something. I bet you want to know before Monday, because your team will have either secured it or screwed the pooch. And it's more likely they're going to screw the pooch because, guys, I don't know if you know this, but in the commercial world, like a lot of times the fire department will be alerted to these commercial things because the sprinklers would pop or something will happen. And these commercial jobs will appear on fire scanners, okay? And that's how you get fire chasers chasing these big commercial jobs. And I got news for you, bro. If you send your standard residential, I'm going to go sign this job team to a 50,000 square foot commercial loss, they're going to get their teeth kicked in because they're going to have ServPro, ServiceMaster, like at least those two big guys. There's a lot of these large Belfour. There's a lot of these commercial franchises, or they're franchises that specialize in commercial water damage. Okay, and I've got one good friend, a guy that he owns a big one up in Wisconsin, a big ServiceMaster, and that's about all they do, right? And they do it really, really well. And to be honest with you, if you're going to be in ServiceMaster or in ServPro or Belfour, one of those 1-800 water damage, like you really need to be good at those big commercial things because they don't really support you on the residential stuff. They just don't. That's not what they do. That's not what they do well. Desk kits on the back of 18-wheelers, that's what they do pretty well, okay? So for whatever that's worth. But just, I digress, okay? Residential water jobs, much more easy and streamlined to stay on top of, right? So you've got your evaluation and your engineering. In that phase, they may be looking at, should we demolish or should we restore? And this will typically happen after drying, but maybe not always. Because if it's a fire, you may not even dry the thing, right? Like if there's safety concerns about can you walk into the building, you're not gonna be putting equipment in there, okay? You're not gonna be putting equipment in there. So like that's the other hard thing about fires is you don't even dry every single job. You really don't. I mean, you normally do, but there are cases to where there's structural damage and it's not safe to dry. And if it's not safe to dry, guess what you shouldn't be doing? You shouldn't be drying it because you need to be getting there and you've got to be cleaning the structure anyway, okay? You got to get that thing ready to dry. In the most cases, or in many cases anyway, you're going to spend more of that time on the structural cleaning of the fire job. And by the time you get done, you're not going to be drying it out because the roof's ripped off or whatever else, okay? So again, all those. Now, the next phase we'll have is scoping for reconstruction because you can't truly scope for reconstruction until you've decided what the scope is going to be. The engineer needs to spell out, are we actually going to keep this or not, all right? So that's the reason why I pulled those pieces out of there, okay? So now I'm going to bring this back. So let's try to talk about this. What is drying, okay? Like if we're going to more simplify this, I broke things out into drying and cleaning and then kind of reconstruction. But if you're looking at what is drying consist of, here's the terms that you will hear related to drying, okay? Water mitigation, restoration, mitigation, EMS, emergency services. When you hear those terms, most of the time, those terms are relating or referring to what we're doing in the drying phase, at least with respect to a water job, okay? Now, if you're not on a water job, you're on a fire job, take it with a grain of salt. At this point, I'm going to kind of dial things back and talk more about water jobs because you guys are going to want some consistency, right? So now we're just going to talk more about water. If you want to do more about fire, shoot me a message or drop a comment down below and we can break it out. But I think for the sake of the video, it's going to be easier to kind of stay in one single lane, okay? So water mitigation, water restoration. So well, let's back up. We can't even unpack the term restoration yet. The restoration, here's how I would define restoration. Everything that we've talked about thus far, okay? All of these items here, from the emergency response, the cleaning, the drying, the evaluation, the scoping it for rebuild and actually rebuild, all of that together, all of that is restoration. The act of restoration, okay? Does that make sense? And this is important because at some point you're probably going to need to communicate this to your client. And I would encourage you to try and keep it simple. Don't get too deep in the weeds because if you get real technical, they're gonna get a zombie face and you're gonna lose them. You just need to tell them this, man, restoration is actually composed of a few different phases. We've got to do the emergency stuff first. That's what we're doing here now today. We're going to get this thing opened up, cleaned up, and dried out. And then once we do that, then we can get a real good scope of work for the repairs. And then so it's going to be dry down, rebuild. And that's really the most simple way to handle a water damage restoration project. Now, there are other things that can pop up along the way. You can have environmental concerns. You may have contents in the way. If you've got a hoarder situation, boom, you know what that is. Hoarders hoarders is a content situation you've got to deal with before you can properly dry it, okay? Because you don't know until you've pulled all this stuff back. Many times in hoarding situations, they turn into Cat 3 really quick because there's a lot of feces from animals. And you don't always know that until you get in there, okay? You can typically smell it though, but hoarding situations are really, really nasty, all right? But just suffice it to say that when you're talking with your homeowner, when they say restoration, you just need to inform your homeowner, let her know, hey man, restoration is actually a couple different pieces. You've got the emergency room piece. That's what we're doing now, right? Once you get into a car accident, you go to the emergency room. Now, and you get whatever care or treatment you need right then. Maybe you're conscious, maybe you're not conscious, but you go to the emergency room, okay? So phase one is the emergency room visit, right? That's what we're doing today. That's where we're responding to the house. We're sucking up the water, pulling the baseboards, drying it out. That's the emergency room visit, all right? All of the putting it back together, that's going to be the orthopedic surgery. We don't do that in the ER, okay? We're going to get you stable here tonight, and then you're going to go off to surgery tomorrow, and the operating room with the orthopedic surgeon, and then they will teach you how to walk again. That's all in the rebuild. We're here to just get the bleeding stopped and get everything safe and prepared so they can do that work tomorrow. And that's how this industry works, okay? I don't know a good place to put this, so I'm gonna stick it in now because it's kind of out of sequence, but I'm ADD and it's here. But have you ever been to a job and you go to sign that job and then they say, hey, okay, this is great, but I can't sign your work authorization because my insurance told me to get 3 estimates. Their insurance company told them to get 3 estimates. I'm sure you've probably heard that. And if you haven't, keep going because you're gonna eventually hear that. But many times, here's what they mean when they say that. Number one, what does their insurance company mean? Who did you speak to? Did you speak to an adjuster? Did you speak to an agent? Did you speak to someone that answers the phone at the agent's office? Who did you talk to? Did you speak to your cousin? Who did you talk to? This is very, very important because these people may have given them bad advice, okay? But in most cases, here's the deal. When the prospect tells you that they were told they need 3 estimates, what they're telling you is, you are going to have to overcome the objection about you can't start now because you've got to explain to them that restoration begins now, right? Like there's multiple phases to this. And that 3 estimate thing, that happens on rebuild, not right now. Not right now. Or maybe there's a case where they ask them to get 3 estimates, but what they're really trying to do is just make sure that it's not going to be a $0 claim. In other words, if it's a $5,000 deductible, they want to make sure that there's not $4,999 of damage because that's what we call a $0 claim. Because if the damages do not exceed the cost of the deductible, you should not have filed a claim, but it still stays on your CLUE report and goes against you. Okay, so that might be one situation where the agent doesn't want that because if you get too many claims, they get dropped, and that agent loses that client as the book of business. Agent doesn't like that. Do you know how much money agents spend every year on marketing? A lot. So if they spend all that to get somebody, they certainly want to keep them. So they want to make sure they don't file a $0 claim. If you hear them say you got to get 3 estimates, just know that in many cases it might be speaking about the recon, right? And if so, then you've just got to tell the homeowner, listen, ma'am, here's what they mean about the estimate thing, okay? And I'm more than glad to walk you through it. I'll call them right now. And that's what you're gonna have to do. You're gonna have to let the homeowner know, pull up a chair, put your arm around them. Maybe don't do that, but just like sit down, let them know you care about them. You're gonna make this right and say, hey, let me make that call for you here right now. I'll put it on speakerphone. And then you walk that customer through that conversation with whoever it is, okay? Because maybe whoever they were talking to, you got to keep in mind, like you don't know what the homeowner said to that person. Like it could be like the blind leading the blind. You're going to be the best authoritative voice, okay? At least more so than the homeowner because you've done this before, they have not, okay? And if you guys are at startup and you've never done this, well, you're going to learn pretty quick because your client is going to talk themselves into a denied claim, okay? So let's just know this. Your client is OJ, all right? The insurance company is the DA trying to get a confession out of him. You are Robert Shapiro. You have to protect your client, okay? So they get to go home, right? I'm just telling you, it's really quite that simple. If you let your client talk to the insurance company blindly without you making sure, because I'm telling you, man, they ask questions that will either limit or exclude coverage because that's their job. That is their job. But they don't ask the homeowner, or better yet, they don't tell the homeowner that anything you say can and will be used to deny your claim. And if they did do that, read them the Miranda rights, your client might be a little more skittish before they blindly start saying, where were you last night at 7 p.m.? I have news for you. I'm just telling you. They will ask damning questions and get damning evidence, and it will not serve your client. I am telling you now. And if you don't believe me, just keep doing it. And if you have seen this to be true, drop a comment, let me know. I'm just telling you, it's in my best interest. It's in my best interest for my client to get paid because when they get paid, I get paid. Does that make sense? And so we are on the same team here. The insurance company and the insured, not on the same team at all. Nope, they're on different teams, as a matter of fact, okay? They want to make it right. If they should make it right, but if it could be denied, it will be denied. And I got news for you. It doesn't take 55 pages of legal mumbo jumbo in an insurance policy to say, if it gets wet, I'll fix it, we're good. It takes 55 pages to fill it full of loophole and jargon so that they don't have to cover it. That's exactly what happens on every single case, right? So y'all are getting me on my soapbox, but for whatever that's worth, hopefully that was helpful. All right, so let's talk about this one more time before we move back to all of the random terms. We'll define those in just a minute, but I want to take a minute and let's just define this. Right now, I've got 3, 4 buckets that I want to put things in. I've got drying, cleaning and environmental, and then things standing in the way of mitigation, because these are all really important things. And then I've got rebuild right down here, okay? Rebuild's right here. But for drying, water mitigation, EMS, restoration, a lot of those terms are going to be mostly commonly referred to in the drying phase, okay? Mold remediation, these are going to be typically in the second phase. And I got them here because those things, like you can't, technically this right here would be in front of drying, okay? Because you can't dry something until these things here are handled. You can't dry something because you can't put air on something with asbestos or with mold or with lead paint, okay? You got to get that stuff fixed first, all right? So, but I put drying first just because I did, all right, for whatever it's worth. And I guess the reason why I did is because in water damage, guys, I would say the average job doesn't have mold on it. Like it might have some mold on it, but like it's not like in the average job, a Clean Cat 1 loss that occurred 4 hours ago, there's not mold present. On the Clean Cat 1 loss where a pipe broke, there's not mold present. And so for that reason, I put the cleaning later because typically it's drying and rebuild, drying and rebuild, drying and rebuild. Now in water damage, sometimes there'll be something standing in the way of drying. So you're gonna respond to do the drying. You might find some stuff standing in the way, mold remediation, cleaning, content, stuff like that. And that's where I go back to the stuff that could be standing in the way. Maybe you've got structural issues, environmental hazards. These are kind of the same thing, right? I just said cleaning, environmental, that's what they are. Really, in layman's terms, these are just things standing in the way of you trying to do your job, okay? That's really what they are. They're just things standing in the way of you trying to do your job. So let's pull back out and we'll talk a little more about some of these terms, all right? Restoration. I would best describe restoration as the entire piece of, like, it's the entire puzzle. Once you put all the pieces together, that's restoration, okay? And when you restore a project, you're restoring it to pre-loss condition, right? There's all of those legal terms. I'm not going to get into that, right? But restoration is kind of that entire thing. Remediation, that's related to mold, okay? Mold remediation or mediation, that's more of a cleaning environmental stuff. Remediation and abatement should be kind of put in the same bucket, okay? Mitigation is typically referring to water. Water mitigation, water damage restoration, same thing as, right, as mitigation. Mitigation means you're protecting it, all right, against damage. And technically in restoration, guys, what we're here to do is to restore the property, right? Number one. But in the emergency phase, which is what we respond to initially in the water section, or at the water phase, the emergency room piece, we want to stabilize the environment, get the water out of there, and protect the structure against further loss. We want to extract the water, dry it down, so we can protect the structure from further loss. Secondary damages, okay? And now I'll have another video and we'll talk more about like secondary damage, all those things. But I want this video to first say, because the whole idea of this video is, what is restoration? Well, restoration is all of these things put together, okay? Rebuild, reconstruction, put back, all that's on the back half side. So again, for the sake of water damage restoration, you've got the emergency services, dry down, and then you got the put back, the rebuild. Dry it, put it back together. Does that make sense? That's how it works. And a lot of these things, I try to simplify these things. If you heard me refer to, I've got another video called Get Job, Do Job, Build Job, Collect Job. Those are the 4 milestones that you have to accomplish in every single job. You got to get it, then you got to do it, then you got to bill it, you got to collect it, all right? I try to take everything and simplify it as much as I can. So today, hopefully in this video, we've talked about a lot of different terms that are floating around out there, right? I think we covered those, like the pack up, pack out, pack back. There's other terms that we'll talk about, okay, in another video where we're just going to be breaking down other pieces of terminology. The biggest thing that I want to go through today is define what is restoration and what are those big pieces, right? So the drawdown and the rebuild and the put back, everything that you do, everything related to a project, all of that is restoration. And the idea of restoration is to restore the property back to pre-loss condition. That's what it is. I think where everybody goes off tracks is just really trying to break out all these terms and use them out of sequence. So hopefully that's helpful for you guys. If you like it, drop a comment down below. Do me a favor, share this on social media, and we'll see you guys in the next video. If you guys enjoyed that video, I've got 3 things for you. First off, there's a couple of other videos somewhere on the screen. You can click those now to go watch more content about growing your restoration company. Number 2, if you haven't already subscribed, click my face below and that will subscribe you to the channel. And finally, if you would like for me to help you grow your restoration company, go to workwithshane.com, put in your information, and let's get on a 15-minute call. We'll see you then.